forgot the prayer. It's okay. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We'll omit the prayer since I forgot to put it up there on the screen. It will omit the prayer for that reason. We continue with this wonderful chapter. We have just 2 chapters more to go, except the next chapter is, I think, 300 verses. So it'll be a while, but we're not in any hurry, right? And the reason for that is the whole purpose of a text like this is to keep you immersed in the teachings of Advaita Vedanta for a period of time. Otherwise, I can just sit here and say Tattvamasi and send you home, and what good is that? You get the point. So it really is a matter of remaining immersed in these teachings for a period of time. Otherwise, why would Shankara go on and on and on like this? It's very intentional. So, with that in mind, we'll pick up the thread. What we've been discussing is Shankara's brilliant analysis of experience. And by experience, we mean ordinary experience. We mean this experience, sitting here in this class, or I forgot to welcome our many students attending this class online, watching this class remotely. That's an ordinary experience. This is an ordinary class taught by an ordinary Swami to, I think some of you are a little more than ordinary, but that's not our topic right now. That's my impression anyway. But the point is that hidden in this ordinary experience is something quite extraordinary. And to be very specific, the consciousness by which you know this ordinary experience, the nature of that consciousness is truly extraordinary. That consciousness is you, so therefore your true nature is truly extraordinary, and that's what Shankara is bringing out verse after verse after verse, and we will continue that today. Satyam jnanam anantam cha, satyam jnanam anantam cha, prasade panchakat param, prasade panchakat param, syamadrashyadi shastroktam, Syamadrishyadi shastroktam aham brahmeti nirbhayaha aham brahmeti nirbhayaha. Oh, that's live. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. Okay, we're fine here. Sorry for the interruption. So Shankara continues to point out what is extraordinary in this ordinary experience is your consciousness, which is satyam. Real means uncreated and unchanging. That which undergoes change is less real. This is our discussion some time ago. Anything that undergoes change is less real than that which is unchanging. That's how we understand real. So this pot can come and go. The clay remains. So in this example, clay is more real than the pot, and in the same way, consciousness is more real than your body, mind, and the world around us. Okay, Satyam Jnanam Anantam. You've heard that before. Actually, you've probably heard it as Satyam Jnanam Ananda. But this term, this use of the word jnanam, of course, means consciousness here. The term anantam is actually preferred by scholars because it avoids, anantam means limitless. and it avoids a problem associated with the word ananda, which we've discussed here many times, and that is to wrongly interpret ananda as an experience of bliss. We're not talking about an experience of bliss, we're talking about the one who experiences bliss and everything else. So that consciousness by whom bliss is experienced is ananta, limitless, infinite. And rasa dehe panchakat param. It is param, beyond. It is beyond panchakam, the 5 koshas, beginning with rasa. Rasa rasa here refers to the annamaya kosha, so beyond the physicality of who you are. And he says, adrishyadi shastra uktam. It is that which is uktam, described in shastra uktam, described in the scriptures as adrishyadi, as unobservable. Unobservable because we're not talking about the observed, we're talking about the observer. Very clear to you all. But the interesting word so far is syam, which is a verb, which means it's a potential case of the verb I am. Syam, I am. First person. And that is what one of many things that differentiates Advaita Vedanta from philosophy. Philosophy is in general abstract and conceptual. What is abstract or conceptual about I am? That's our experience right now. I am, I exist, I am conscious, I am a conscious being. Syam, I am that. Now introducing the next verse, he says, Aham Brahma iti nirbhayaha. Aham Brahma, again first person. I am that Brahman, which here is described as Satyam Jnanam Anantam Rasadehi Param, etc., everything we've just seen. Remember, the ultimate vision of the ancient rishis is that the reality because of which you exist, that we call atma, and the reality because of which everything exists, everything else exists, that we often call Brahman, that reality, the reality because of which you exist and the reality because of which everything else exists are not two different realities, leading to something very unintuitive. We started off talking about the consciousness present in this experience. You wouldn't intuit that your consciousness, your in quotation marks, that your consciousness is the underlying reality because of which the world of name and form exists. That's not obvious. That's why we turn to the insights of the ancient rishis, here expressed in Shankara's teachings. Without those insights, we wouldn't make that connection. And of course, that's the connection that reveals Atma to be identical to Brahman in the famous Mahavakya, Prajnanam Brahma. Consciousness is Brahman, and also expressed in the Mahavakya, Tat Tvam Asi. Tvam, the reality because of which you exist, and Tat, the reality because of which everything else exists. Asi, you are that. Okay, so Aham Brahma iti, again first person, nirbhayaha. This is what's introducing the next verse. Because nirbhaya, many of you know, means without fear. Now, what is he? Why is he talking about fear? You know, we're talking all this high philosophical language, and then suddenly he's talking about fear? Why? Well, two reasons. One reason we'll see when we get to the next verse, but I think The most obvious reason is, we just said, this is not a philosophy. This is a solution to the problem of suffering. And here's an interesting take on suffering. Suppose you feared nothing. Suppose, just imagine, you were utterly fearless, hypothetically. What would make you suffer? Suppose a doctor diagnoses you with terminal cancer. You're not afraid of cancer, you're not afraid of dying, you're not afraid of pain. Where's the suffering? So it's very significant that fear is not a synonym for suffering, but definitely in the absence of fear, what is there to make you suffer? And that's what's a different perspective is offered by Shankara in this next verse. Yasmad bhita pravartante, yasmad bhita pravartante, vangmana pavakadayaha, vangmana pavakadayaha, taratmananda tattvajño, taratmananda tattvajño, nabibheti kutaschana, nabibheti kutaschana. Taratmananda, I'm famous. Sorry, that's a bad joke. We'll come to that in just a moment. Actually, let me introduce this verse because Shankara here is paraphrasing from the Taittiriya Upanishad. I'll just share with you that mantra, and it'll make this verse much more comprehensible. So in the middle part of the Taittiriya, we have this wonderful, very poetic passage. Bhishma smadvatah pavate, bhishodeti suryaha, bhisha smadagnischendrascha, mrityurdhavati panchamayati. Bhishma asmat vata pavate, vataha, the winds, pavate, the winds blow, asmat, because of this. Because of what? Bhisha, fear. I should say bhisha, fear asmat, of that. And the commentary goes on to explain it in more detail. Because of fear of Brahman, fear of the boss. Fear of Brahman is the technical. So the winds have a boss. Winds are not independent, from a modern scientific standpoint. Winds don't choose where they blow. It's all driven by the forces of nature. I think mostly heat and cooling is what drives wind, the heat and cooling of our atmosphere. So the winds are not independent. They are controlled. They are a slave. So this is metaphoric. They are a slave to the forces of nature. Bhisha udeti suryaha. The sun rises due to fear. Same fear. It's like, I'm in a mood for bad jokes. I should probably limit myself. But it's like you wake up in the morning out of fear of losing your job if you don't turn up on time. So here the sun is a slave to nature, rises out of fear. Bhishasmad agnischendrascha, agnihi cha indraha cha. Even the gods Agni and Indra have fear of this underlying, of the big boss. Here Brahman is the big boss, metaphorically. Mrityuhu dhavati. And even death runs away from this so-called big boss. So these expressions are very poetic, but made to show a subservient level of reality. So none of the winds and death and the sun do not have an independent existence. Their existence is, from a philosophical standpoint, from a Advaita Vedantic standpoint, the existence of all these depends on Brahman. Therefore, they are subservient realities. And that's what Shankara says here. Yasmad bhitaha pravartante vak mana pavakadayaha. So yasmad bhitaha, because of which these are afraid. Bhitaha. What are afraid? Vak, the power of speech. Mana, mind. Pavaka here, fire. Adayaha, etc. Because of which your faculties. So the Taittiriya passage is at a worldly level. You can think of the faculties of the world. Faculties of the world is to burn things and blow things, etc. Laws of nature could be considered metaphorically the faculties of the world. Here Shankara refers to your faculties of speech, mind. Fire could be fire of digestion. There are various ways of taking this. But all of these are bhitaha. All of these function out of metaphoric fear, as we saw in the Taittiriya Upanishad. Bhitaha pravartante. Pravartante, they function. Bhitaha, because of fear. Fear of what? Yasmat. Because. They're fear of which. So they're driven by fear. On the other hand, so the faculties which make you an individual person are driven out of fear, which is a metaphor, meaning they are subservient, they are subject to change, they exist dependent on Brahman, they are not independent. On the other hand, tad atma ananda tattvajnaha. Tattvajnaha, one who knows the truth of what? Atma-ananda, Atma, which is sat-chit-ananda, knowing Atma to be Tat. Tat is Brahman, as in Tattvamasi. One who knows one's true nature to be Atma, na bibheti kutaschana, doesn't fear anything, has no fear of anything, because you discover you are that Brahman, which I said in a very silly way, that Brahman is the big boss. You are not a subservient reality. You are not a dependent reality. You are identical to the big boss, Tadatma. By the way, interesting, my guru gives... Some people ask, when they receive initiation, a few of his students ask for a particular name, and out of kindness, he'll give you whatever name you request. But most of his students don't request a name, because we prefer to get a name that he chooses, not a name that we choose. So he chooses this name, Tadatmananda, Tadatma. All of the names he chooses are Mahavakyas. Tadatma is a Mahavakya. Atma is Tat, Brahman. So can't do better than that. So these are, if you look at the names of his disciples, you will see almost all of them are Mahavakyas, and the few that aren't are the few that were requested by the disciple. As I said, out of kindness, he gives that. So here we have recognized, here Shankara points out that when you recognize that let me use a different kind of language. When you recognize that your consciousness is a fundamental reality, I find that a very potent way of putting it. We think of consciousness in terms of our constantly changing experience. And experience is certainly, what to say, it goes on changing, subject to highs and lows always, subject to pain, suffering, pain and sadness, all of that. But when you discern that the consciousness by which all those experiences are known, or better said, the consciousness which is the, watch this language carefully, the consciousness which is the content of experience. Try that. Consciousness is the content of experience, like clay is the content of the pot. So pot is nama-rupa plus content, right? Clay. Thoughts and experience are nama-rupa plus content. But there the content is not clay, hopefully. The content is consciousness. And I want to say this again because it's a very profound perspective. A pot is nama-rupa plus a content. Experience is nama-rupa plus a content. The content of the pot is clay. The content of your experiences is consciousness. And to discover that that consciousness is a fundamental reality, an unchanging fundamental reality, that which is unchanging, to use the word immutable, very famous philosophical word. Everyone loves, the translators like to use that word, immutable. Well, it simply means unchangeable, right? And that which is unchangeable, as we've discussed in this class many times, that which is unchangeable, we use a different word, invulnerable, right? Can't be touched, can't be injured. In order to be, any kind of injury requires change. That which is unchanging is absolutely immune to any kind of injury. And that is the basis for abhaya, for fearlessness. And, okay, we'll continue. These verses are fairly simple, but then we get a problem. We'll come to that. Namadibhya pare bhumni, namadibhya pare bhumni, swarajye chet stito dvaye, swarajye chet stito dvaye. Pranametkam tadatmagno, pranamekam tadatmagno, nakaryam karmana tada, nakaryam karmana tada. So, referring to consciousness as a fundamental reality. That consciousness as a fundamental reality is pare, beyond. Beyond what? Namadi, name and form. Just as clay is beyond not in a physical sense. We're not talking about distance. We're talking about in a more fundamental sense. Clay is beyond the name and form pot, and beyond, in a sense, a higher order of reality. That's the technical way of understanding it. Clay is a higher order of reality. Remember, our definition of reality is in terms of change. That which changes more is less real. That which changes less is more real. This is our understanding of reality. That which is utterly unchanging is absolutely real. So this is a worldly example. So in this worldly example, we're not saying clay is absolutely real, but it is more real than the pots. This is the idea. So here, your consciousness, just for starters, your consciousness is definitely more real than your body and mind. How much has your body and mind aged by now? Lots. And you've probably had a day or a week where you felt like you aged 1 year in that single day or week, one of those really stressful times. So anyway, your body and mind are subject to tremendous change, to aging. We'll just stay with the metaphor here, aging, or the idea here. Aging. How much has your consciousness aged? That's interesting. Our consciousness doesn't seem to have age. The consciousness which reveals your experience right now seems to be identical to the consciousness which revealed your experiences 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever. So in that sense, simply at a worldly level, consciousness is more real than your body-mind. That's at a worldly level. Now we go the extra step and say that consciousness is a fundamental reality, which is absolutely unchanging. Not relatively, the clay is relatively unchanging. I gave an example of how your consciousness is relatively unchanging. Relatively means relative to your body and mind. But that's relatively. But here, we understand, with the help of Shankara's teachings, that consciousness is not just relatively more real than your body and mind, but is absolutely more real, absolutely unchanging as a fundamental reality. So, nama rupa pare, beyond name and form, bhumni, vast, limitless, without boundary, without edge. That's a nice contemplation, just to sit and meditate and find out where does consciousness end? And in meditation, by the way, I mentioned before in a class that we're going to resume our advanced meditation soon, hopefully at the beginning of the year. And a favorite meditation is this: when you are sufficiently absorbed that you lose any connection with your body and mind, then you entertain the question, where is the edge of my consciousness? And if you're not associated with your body and mind, you find that your consciousness has no edge whatsoever. Boundaryless, limitless, bhumni, that consciousness which is vast. Swarajye stitaha. Stitaha, established in Swarajye. An interesting expression used in Advaita Vedanta. Established, Raja means kingdom, but it can't mean kingdom here. A good translation would be established in oneself is okay. But more literally, established in your own greatness is the sense of this word, swarajye stitaha. Established in your own vastness. Established in yourself as a fundamental reality, which is advaya, non-dual, that Brahman being the non-dual reality because of which the world of duality exists. Chet, if you get it, and chet means if you really get it, and get it not at a conceptual or abstract level, but get it in this first person, I am that, I am consciousness, I am that consciousness which is a fundamental reality, unchanging, identical to Brahman, the fundamental reality because of which everything exists. When you get it in the first person, Chet, suppose you get it in the first person, then he says, come pranamate Tada atmagnaha. Tada, then, so chet, if you really get it, tada, then, atmagnaha, one who knows atma, or it could also be tadatmagnaha, one who knows atma to be tat. By the way, this word tadatma can be broken up in two ways. It can either be tada, then, atma, but grammatically. But I think here in grammatically not tada, but rather tadatmagnaha, one who knows atma to be tat, Brahman, as in my name as a Mahavakya. For that person who knows atma, consciousness, to be Brahman, to be a fundamental reality. One who knows one's own consciousness to be a fundamental reality, the fundamental reality. What about that person? Kam pranamate. To whom should he or she bow? Kam pranamate. This is a very typical kind of Hindu expression, because we're always thinking about bowing at the altar. We say namaste to each other, which is bowing to the inner divinity of each person. And it's a wonderful expression, but he says, swarajestataha, when you're established in your own truth as a fundamental reality, to whom should you bow? Previously, we said that the wind and sun are like slaves. Who is your boss? If you're a slave, who is your master, I should say? So when you are fully identified as being consciousness, that fundamental reality, there's no reality greater than you. That's the point. There is no reality greater than you. And further, nakaryam karmana tada, and here comes the tada. So chet, tada. Chet and tada like to be connected. So if you understand this, tada, then in the last line, then nakaryam karmana. Then there's nothing further to be accomplished, karmana, through any effort. You're finished. We used the very beautiful expression, krita krityata, a condition of having accomplished everything in life that needs to be accomplished. And the silly example I've given is, imagine having a to-do list, not for the week, for your entire life. And imagine suddenly every item is checked off. Krita krityata, nothing further to be accomplished. Okay, these verses have been very simple and straightforward. The next verse, or the next two verses, are really the opposite. In order to understand the next verse, you need to understand all of cosmology in Sankhya and Vedanta, and the relationship between microcosm and macrocosm. It would take a long time to explain all of that. So I've mentioned before that I've been skipping over certain verses. In fact, this chapter has 88 verses in it. I thought I would skip over about half of them. So far, we've skipped over, I think, 2 or 3 maybe before, and now we're going to skip over 2 more. And the reason for that, I want to skip over verses that will destroy our momentum, or verses that require you to have a very strong background in aspects of philosophy, like tarka, logic, like vaisheshika, nyaya, and nyaya, these technical aspects that are part of the tradition of Vedanta. So when we come to such verses, we're skipping over them, and surprisingly few we're skipping over, but we will skip over the next 2 verses. And so from 63, we go to verse 66. Bharupatvat yatha bhanor, bharupatvat yatha bhanor, Nahoratre tathaivatu. Nahoratre tathaivatu. Jnana jnanena me syatam. Jnana jnanena me syatam. Chidrupatva visheshataha. Chidrupatva visheshataha. Yatha, just as, bhanoho bharupatvat. Because the sun, bhanu, because the sun has bharupatva, the nature of shining. Because the sun, by nature, is shining, it's swarupa. That's an important word. Swarupa, essential nature. And essential nature means that which doesn't change. Is there such a thing as a sun that doesn't shine? And please don't give me a lecture on astrophysics and say, well, so Swamiji, suns burn out and they become neutron stars. And fine. That's not the metaphor here. Nor did Shankaracharya know anything about neutron stars. And anyway, so the nature of the sun is to shine, which is unchanging in this ancient worldview, unchanging, shining nature, swarupa. Therefore, for the sun, na aha ratra, na ahar. Oh, that's a nice Sunday. Ahar followed by ratra. Ahar, that ra becomes like a visarga. So ahoratra. Anyway, it's actually a common expression, but the sandhi, the grammar rules are a little bit obscure here. Anyway, sorry to bore you with that. There is no ahar or ratra, no day or night for the sun. That's pretty obvious. The sun goes on. We have day and night here because we go through periods of light and darkness. There is no periods of light or darkness for the sun because it only shines without change, unchanging, shining nature. Not surprisingly, this light and dark are often metaphors for knowledge and ignorance. So the question that's asked is if enlightenment is the destruction of ignorance and the acquisition of knowledge, this is it's a very good argument. The argument goes like this. If Atma is unchanging, how does unchanging Atma have its ignorance destroyed and gain knowledge? Because to destroy ignorance is a change, to gain knowledge is a change. If Atma is unchanging, then it can't lose its ignorance, it can't acquire knowledge. So then how is enlightenment possible? We've actually had this discussion before. Shankara makes it very clear here. He says jnana and ajnana, knowledge and ignorance, na me syatam, do not belong to me. We're back to first person. Do not belong to me. Me, referring to whom? So when Shankara says me, is he referring to the teacher of Sureshwara, Padmapada, and his other disciples? So when Shankara says me, at least in this verse, he's referring to consciousness. So he says, ignorance and knowledge do not belong to me, do not belong to consciousness. The way you've heard from me before that Vedanta is not for Atma. This is how we've described it before. Atma doesn't need Vedanta. Atma doesn't need enlightenment. Atma never got into a state of bondage in the first place. The one who needs Vedanta is the one who says, I suffer. Consciousness doesn't say, I suffer. It doesn't say anything. So consciousness is as that fundamental reality. The problem, clearly, the problem is ignorance. What is the locus of ignorance? In an experiential sense, in the mind. So the mind is troubled. The mind is, stay with that. Mind is troubled by ignorance, and the problem in the mind is solved with a solution in the mind. If the problem is in the mind, mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha moksha yoho, this famous quotation, that bondage and moksha belong to the mind alone. So the problem is in the mind. What is it? The famous thing, doctor, what's wrong with me? And the doctor says, it's all in your mind. Okay. It is. Except that's not what the doctor meant, unfortunately. So, Shankara says, Name syatam. There is no ignorance for me, for sat-chit-ananda atma. And he explains that in the final line. Chid-rupatva avisheshataha. Because avisheshataha chid-rupatva. Because my nature is chid-rupa, it's nothing but consciousness, like the sun is nothing but shining, your true nature is nothing but consciousness. Avisheshataha. I translate here as pure. What change? It gets very technical very quickly. Visheshana is an adjective. Adjectives, I'll give you the brief version. Adjectives change. This pot could be big, small, green, blue, anything. Adjectives change, not the clay. So, avishesha, that which has no adjectives. Nirguna, that which has no adjectives. Nirguna, avishesha. Okay, then. Oh, we're going well. A couple more today. Shastrasya nati shankyatvat, Shastrasya nati shankyatvat, Brahmaivasyamaham sada, Brahmaivasyamaham sada, Brahmano me naheyam syad, Brahmano me naheyam syad, Grahyam veti cha samsmaret, Grahyam veti na samsmaret. In the second line, he says, Brahma eva syam aham. Aham, I. Syam, I am. Brahma eva, Brahman alone, sada, eternally. I am nothing but Brahman. Notice we're back to the first person. And how are you, Shankara is so certain. How can he be so certain? One reason he gives in the first line, Shastrasya atishankyatvat. So the scriptures would say, Tattvamasi, you are that Brahman. He says, atishankyatvat, because those shastrasya, because the scriptures are anatishankya, cannot be doubted. Now, let's be very clear here. When Shankara says the scriptures cannot be doubted, does he mean that these scriptures should just be accepted as dogma, which is a very common approach towards scripture? If it's in scripture, it must be true. Why? It says so. This is the common circular logic. The Bible is a word of God. Why? Because it says so. You see the circular logic there? The Bible is a word of God because the Bible says so. Anyway, we don't accept this kind of circular logic here. And we've had this discussion many times that Shastra is the teachings of the ancient rishis, which describes their personal discoveries, which are passed on to us in the form of words which are, figuratively speaking, a road map, a methodology is the correct term, a methodology that we can use and discover exactly what they discovered. Does that sound like does it sound like Western scriptures? Not at all. So Western scriptures are largely dogmatic. Dogma means a statement which is presumed true without proof. Dogma is a statement which is given the status of being true without requiring proof. And that's absolutely contrary to Vedanta. Everything in the scriptures, everything in the Vedantic scriptures is personally verifiable. You notice I corrected myself? Why? Everything in the scriptures is personally verifiable. The scriptures say if you do this particular ritual, you can go to heaven. Well, that is not personally verifiable. So this is back to the differentiation we've made many times between differentiating the karma kanda of the Veda and the jnana kanda of the Veda. So when the Vedas are teaching about rituals, that's one matter. And if you want to call that dogma, I wouldn't prefer that word, but I wouldn't argue it either. But we don't care about that. As students of Vedanta, we're not performing all those rituals. Our focus is on the jnana kanda, the teachings of the ancient rishis, unfolding this brilliant wisdom. So, shastrasya anatishankyatvat, because these scriptures are supported by reasoning and personally validated. Shruti yukti anubhava, as we've discussed so many times. So because these scriptures are supported by reasoning, yukti, and the truth of the scriptures can be personally verified, anubhava. Therefore, Shankara says, Brahmeva syamaham. I am that Brahman. Brahmano me. Brahmanaha me. For me, I'm smiling because of Shankara's language. For me, who happens to be Brahman, Brahmanaha me, because he puts these two words next to each other grammatically. For me, for Brahman. Undifferent. Erasing that differentiation between me and Brahman. For me, who is Brahman, or for me because of being Brahman, na heyam syat. There's nothing that needs to be avoided, grahyam va, or gained. Nothing needs to be avoided or gained, because for that which is unchanging, how can you improve it? How can you... What's the opposite of improve? We need a word like deprove. Should be there in the English. In Sanskrit, we have all these prefixes are very flexible. In English, a little less flexible. So if there's such a thing as improvement, the opposite of improve should be deprove. So I'm sorry, I'm just being silly today. Worsen, it would be the correct English word. So that which is unchanging is not subject to becoming better or worse. The metaphor given by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is like the ocean. All the rivers are going into the ocean. It's not rising in level. This is the idea. That which is so vast is unchanging. For unchanging reality, the unchanging fundamental reality that you are, There is no way to improve upon it, nor is there anything that can rob it of its perfection. It can't be improved upon. I still think we should have that word deproved anyway. So there's nothing that can be added to Atma, nothing that can be taken away from Atma. ch17. Thus should you reflect. ch17 literally means to remember, but in this context, he's making a reference now to the next topic, which we'll see next week. The next topic is nididhyasana. The fact that he's already using a lot of first-person language here is usually a clue that our topic is contemplation, nididhyasana. To teach, it's not necessary to use first person. Most teaching goes on in the third person. Sorry to use the grammatical terms, but it's important here. Most teaching goes on in the third person. Shankara has been using first person quite a bit here, which absolutely demonstrates the fact that this is a solution to the problem of suffering, and it's not an abstract philosophy, but more than that. The use of first person is crucial for nididhyasana, Vedantic contemplation. With the word smaret, you should reflect on. You should reflect on the fact that you should reflect how Shankara is modeling the reflection for us. I am Brahman alone. As Brahman, I need to gain nothing and avoid nothing. And Shankara models the reflection for us, models that nididhyasana. And the next series of verses, quite a few, I think at least the next 5 verses are nididhyasana. And so that'll make for a very nice class, nididhyasana, Vedantic contemplation. In our next class, if you've forgotten, I'll remind you what exactly is nididhyasana, and then we'll see Shankara's explanation and examples of how you should meditate, how you should perform this nididhyasana. We'll conclude with a prayer. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.